The Guardian reported that Poles who live in England are hearing very often how immigrants need to go back because they are stealing jobs from native people. Andrzej Rygielski also reported hearing such words. One day, back in 2012, he was going back from shopping with his teenage daughter, only to find abusive and insulting words about Poles written on the walls of his house. 2 years later, he was attacked in a shop where he was working by a customer. In another case, a Muslim woman from Finland went to school with her child, where she was told that children from terrorists are not welcomed. A few days later, she went to the shop to do some grocery shopping and was then approached by a man who threatened her, saying that Muslim terrorists should not live there. Her child, who was there with her, was scared and started crying. No one reacted. Today, what I would like to do is to convince you why is it important to stand up against hate speech. I will be talking about what I call 5 R's. I will be talking about our response to hate speech. I will be talking about our reaction to speech. And I will be also talking about our responsibility to respect human rights and the need to repeat our action against hate speech at all times. If you try to look at the issue of hate speech and to define it, many people will say that this is a speech that threatens, insults, or offends a person or a group of people on the basis of ethnicity, nationality, on the basis of religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. It is a common opinion that hate speech contains hate, but I would like to challenge this. Hate speech, it's not about hate. It's a mechanism of excluding others. It's based on negative biases, prejudice, and stereotypes. Let me give you an example. Very often, we hear a negative stereotype that women are bad at parking. And we use this statement to insult and say offensive words and curses when we see that a woman has a difficulty parking. I'm sure that many of you who are sitting in this room have heard these words or have witnessed them. I want to say one thing. Hate speech is dangerous. Insulting words that you hear have a potential of turning into damage to your property. The damage to your property can escalate into attack on you as an individual or on a person that you love. If left untackled and unaddressed, hate speech has a potential to create a culture of impunity in which more biased speech is encouraged. It can escalate, and I underline the word escalate, into threats, physical assaults, social unrests, crimes, war crimes, or acts of genocide. My own country, where I come from, Bosnia and Herzegovina, where there was a terrible war in the 90s, is a testimony to that. So, what can we do? And this is the reason that I'm here today. Well, there are a couple of things that is possible to do. One example, and this is where I go back to the 5 R's, is to respond and to interrupt hate speech whenever it occurs. One simple thing that you can do is you can provide counterexamples. Let's go back to the example of women who are bad drivers. You can challenge that by saying that European insurance companies, actually, they used to charge younger men higher insurance rates based on statistical data that women were causing less accidents than men, meaning that they were what we would now call better drivers. What else could you do? You can challenge biases and you can challenge prejudice. How do you do this? Again, another example. It's only enough to remember the statements that immigrants need to go home because they are bad and they are stealing other people's jobs. To remember that both Einstein and Nikola Tesla, a famous scientist, were both immigrants and their contribution to their host societies. Another thing you can do, show empathy. I was at a conference in Brussels a few days ago where a woman approached me and she said, every day I go to the metro, I hear insulting words about who I am and about the color of my skin. And what she said was the following: it's not the words that feel hurtful. It's the fact that there is no one else standing next to me. You're scared to approach the victim and to speak to the person because the person talking to her is too aggressive. There is another thing you can do. You can call the police and protect the person who is being threatened. So, some of you may then say, so it means we just need to be tolerant, show empathy, and the problem of hate speech is going to disappear. The only thing we need to do is to be tolerant and politically correct. Again, this is not enough. Challenging hate speech, and I want to say this, it's not about tolerance and it's not about political correctness. Again, it's about providing and challenging hate speech. It is about providing counterexamples, it is about challenging biases, it is about protecting the victim, and it is about showing empathy. Why do we need to do this? If you remember the example from the beginning of my speech, let's think about Andrzej. Every day he would come back home from his work or from the shopping. He would look on the walls of his house, thinking, is there something else written about me, my identity? In the case of a Finnish woman, she would have to talk to her child every day saying, everything will be okay in school, there will be no trouble there. Or, if I were her, I would think every day, is this the shop I would want to go to do some shopping? Or maybe not, maybe I go to the big supermarket that's 2 streets further because there are more people there and I will feel safer there. Hate speech impacts who we are. It impacts our well-being, it impacts our life, and impacts our safety. I believe every one of us in this room, we want to feel safe. Once this TEDx talk is over, we want to go back home and feel safe. This is why it is important to challenge hate speech. But is it enough? Why don't we, and some people have said this to me, why don't we simply arrest perpetrators of hate speech and finish with these things? Well, let me tell you something. In most European countries, there are certain provisions in the law that punish hate speech. For example, Holocaust denial is one case. In most European countries, or in most countries, if I say that I think that people with red pants deserve to die, and I come to you and I destroy your pants and I attack you, I will be punished for 2 things. Because I incited to violence and I also carried an attack. But then, things are also not so simple. And why is that? When I or any one of us speaks, we express our opinions and we express our thoughts. And freedom of expression is a fundamental human right that's recognized in international treaties. I have a right to criticize you for wearing the dress, the same way you have the right to criticize me for wearing ugly glasses. Freedom of expression, being the fundamental human right, can only be limited if this is part of the law and if there is a legitimate aim to protect democratic values. So we need to know how and when to balance hate speech and freedom of expression. And some will ask, how do we know when we cross the lines? Should we balance these two? And how do we know when we have crossed the lines? This is where things get a little bit tricky. And let me give you another example. In most countries, you will find sometimes that politicians use legal provisions of hate speech to basically punish the opposition and to say that they're trying to smear their identity or their political parties, and then they're trying to arrest their opposition or the journalists. It is only enough to open the newspapers today to see and witness the sad fact of how many journalists and human rights defenders are paying the price of free speech. So then again, what is the solution? And I would like to go back again to the 5 R's I mentioned, to the response and the reaction to hate speech, and to our responsibility to respect human rights and freedom of expression. Another example. In a country, a politician said that it was a well-known fact that Muslim children are stealing donuts and bread from other children because they were too poor, or their parents were too poor, and they have nothing to pay this with. In order to challenge this, a group of civil rights activists decided to distribute free donuts on the metro stations and also at the highway toll booths, showing that Muslims can also share this. It is our duty and responsibility to challenge hate speech. At the same time, politicians have a particular duty to respect our rights as our elected representatives. So again, we have to respond and we have to react to hate speech. Most likely, hate speech has been with us as long as there is humankind. Sadly enough, it is still there with us. Again, it's enough to go on social media or to open newspapers to see that this is true. And it will very likely stay with us unless we challenge it. And again, why do we challenge it? I want you to remember two things. We want to challenge it because of the impact it has on the people that it targets, and we want everyone to feel safe. So please join me in that. Thank you.